This is Dr. Marty Harris, and today we will talk about abuse and neglect of children. Abuse and neglect are not new phenomena. It has occurred across all of human history, across all cultures. Abuse and neglect of children with disabilities is a vicious, triple-edged sword, one that wounds deeply and destructively. Consider the cruelty of these three blades. 1. Children with disabilities are more vulnerable to abuse and neglect. 2. Any child who experiences abuse and/or neglect is at risk for failure in schools, in relationships, and in the workplace. Victims of abuse and neglect are more likely to pass on that legacy to the next generation. 3. Abuse and neglect can cause disabilities. It can cause symptoms that are misdiagnosed as a disability, resulting in overlooking the actual abuse and neglect. As professionals, we must become advocates for safety of all children. Our agenda for today's lecture includes definitions, reporting responsibilities, threats to the safety of our children, resources, abuse and neglect of children with disabilities. Here are some statistics for 2006. Neglect, 64.1%. Physical abuse, 16%. Medical neglect, 2.2%, sexual abuse, 8.8%, psychological maltreatment, 6.6%, other unknown or missing, 16.3%. The 5 highest states: Florida, 134,567, California, 89,500, New York, 80,077, Texas, 69,065, Georgia, 39,802. In our region, Arkansas, 9,180, Louisiana, 12,472, Oklahoma, 13,414. In our society, we have been in denial concerning this problem for decades. Others have worked tirelessly. For example, the Children's Defense League has been working to defend children for over 30 years. It is important that educators stay informed. Every year, every semester, every month, you should check these websites, because every day you work with children and adolescents. I had been teaching for 10 years before I worked for a district that addressed child abuse and neglect in a staff development workshop. That was 1986. This illustration spoke to me, and I have kept it all these years as a reminder of the children I worked with. The ones I knew something was wrong. I just couldn't figure out what. Any person having cause to believe, the reporter should recognize that simply having cause to believe is a very low threshold to meet, and that the law is weighted in favor of protecting the child. Maya's story. Maya was raped at the age of 5 and afterwards was reluctant to tell the name of her rapist. When she did finally tell her family, the man was arrested and quickly released. She heard soon thereafter how he had been vengefully murdered, and she was traumatized. I stopped speaking. I thought if I spoke, my voice might just go out and randomly kill people, Angelo explained. She didn't utter one word for 5.5 years. During this time, a teacher named Mrs. Flowers would invite Maya to come visit for cookies and lemonade. Maya listened as Mrs. Flowers read Dickens and Shakespeare and others. After almost 5 years, Mrs. Flowers began to challenge Maya to speak. Maya communicated with her by writing on a notepad, but Mrs. Flowers kept encouraging her to speak. Maya Angelou remembers that it had been so long since she had spoken that she was surprised she actually still had a voice. "So I started speaking again, and I've hardly ever stopped since." Today, Maya Angelou has been a professor, an author, and our nation's poet laureate. If not for Mrs. Flowers, her story would be a very different one. Anyone suspecting abuse or neglect of a child is obligated to report it to Child Protective Services. Failure to report physical or mental abuse or neglect of a child is a crime, punishable by a fine and/or imprisonment. Immunity from civil or criminal liability is guaranteed if the report is made in good faith and without malice. Reports of child abuse or neglect are confidential. There are 5 rules that you should follow as a teacher. 1. Resolve doubt in favor of the child. 2. Trust your instincts, your gut feelings. 3. Remember that you do not have to prove that abuse is occurring. Reporting is a request for an investigation. 4. Remember that an educator who reports is on firm legal ground. 5. Believe the child who discloses and tell the child that he or she has done the right thing by telling you. Here is the definition of abuse: the non-accidental infliction or threat of infliction of physical injury or emotional or mental damage to a child by a person responsible for the child's health or welfare. Abuse can also involve withholding of needed care for the child. What should teachers do? Let your class know that they can talk to you, or a counselor, or a nurse. If you sense a child is trying with difficulty to talk to you, sit down with a simple project, crayons, or a puzzle, and let the child know you will believe and help him or her with any problem. Don't promise not to tell. Assure the child he or she is not in trouble. Tell a child exactly what to expect. If you don't know, say so, but let the child know he or she can expect to be supported and helped by you. Respect the child's privacy by not discussing the situation out of school. Seek out and rely on your support system at school. Follow the district rules. If you are concerned about an administrator not making a report, do so yourself. You might otherwise be liable for failure to report. Neglect. Depriving a child of living conditions which provide the minimally needed physical and emotional requirements for life, growth, and development by a person responsible for a child's health or welfare. In other words, inadequate food, inadequate housing and clothing, lack of needed medical attention, abandonment, lack of supervision or guidance, unmet educational needs, etc. Neglect is the most common form of child maltreatment. 3 times as many children are victims of neglect, 63.2%, as are victims of physical abuse, 18.9%. Another 9.9% are recorded as victims of sexual abuse, 4.9% emotional and psychological maltreatment, and 16.9% other. I just can't imagine what other means. Statistics. On this slide, a variety of statistics are included, which were reported in different years. Read through them. What do these statistics tell you? Victims. Between 1995 and 1997, 78% of child abuse and neglect deaths were children under the age of 5. 38% under the age of 1 year. Girls are sexually abused 3 times more often than boys. Boys are at greater risk for emotional neglect and serious physical injury. However, sexual abuse of boys may be vastly underreported. Women sexually abused before age 18 have lower levels of interpersonal function and social adjustment as adults and are less likely to form trusting relationships. The same can be said for men. Perpetrators. There are common indicators for the perpetrators: substance abuse, lack of parental skills, poor understanding of child's normal developmental path, young maternal age, poverty, and a history of domestic violence. An estimated 1/2 of all homes with adult violence also involve child abuse or neglect. Child molestation remains a crime most often perpetrated by relatives and acquaintances rather than strangers. 1/3 of all child molesters incarcerated in state prisons nationwide had attacked their own children or stepchildren, the majority of whom were age 12 or younger. More than half of the child victims of rape or sexual assault are age 12 or younger. Maxine's my hero. I'd like to be as straightforward and articulate and passionate as she is. Maxine's point is important. Abuse and neglect of children is not just a problem of poverty and single-parent families. Again, overgeneralization and assumptions mislead our thinking about this issue. Let's talk about social workers and the child welfare systems. According to Newsweek, January 20th, 2003, this terrible malfunction of the child welfare system was happening across the country. New Jersey lost track of 110 children suspected of being abused and neglected. Florida, at least 37 children died of abuse and neglect over the last 5 years, despite warnings to caseworkers that they were in danger. Arizona Child Protective Agencies failed to remove a cocaine-addicted newborn from her house, where she later died from second-hand crack smoke. Michigan lost track of 302 children. Caseworkers are embattled. They need more funds, more caseworkers, and updated technology. Consider shaken baby syndrome. Signs and symptoms range from minor to major neurological alterations. 20% of cases are fatal in the first days after the injury. Survivors range from mild to moderate to severe problems. We need to educate children about shaken baby syndrome at an early age because they may become babysitters or may be left in charge of young ones. Television news often reports the cases where a baby has died from being shaken. It's often a source for television dramas. but more often there are children who are shaken, who come to schools with their neurological damage. What's wrong with this picture? When I first saw this picture, I thought, well, I guess that's the way rich children play dress-up. When I asked a colleague what he thought of this picture, he stated emphatically, "That's obscene." Did you notice that when a man falsely confessed to this murder, then the news media consistently showed pictures of Jean Bonnet in a typical little girl dress? We may never know who raped and killed this beautiful child, but we do know that someone saw this child as a sexual object. Let's talk about trusted adults and abuse. Consider the recent scandals in the Catholic Church. In Chicago, $300 million were paid out in lawsuits. In Boston, $10 million was a settlement to 50 cases. Cardinal apologized and handed over 60 to 70 names of priests accused of abusing children. One former priest had 130 victims and was sentenced to 9 to 10 years in prison. There are cases in Dallas, Lafayette, Tucson, Arizona, and Californian archdiocese attempted to file bankruptcy rather than lose church properties to pay for sexual abuse lawsuits. In Newsweek's March 4, 2002, article entitled "Sins of the Fathers" by Miller in France, they discussed the international aspect of the Catholic Church problems with abuse in Ireland, Australia, the USA, and elsewhere. In this article, the author suggested that there is an institutions reaction pattern that was evident in the Catholic Church and in the Enron company. That response includes 1. Deny it. 2. Delay it. 3. Dissemble it. 4. Fool themselves into thinking that all is well. What is difficult for me to understand is the lack of application of law to the institutions of the Catholic Church. If someone reports suspected abuse to a principal or a teacher, they are required by law to report allegations to the police. Why doesn't that apply to the Catholic Church? Some argue that it is because of the confidentiality of the confessional. But I would counterpoint, when parents or the child or a teenager report abuse to a priest or a bishop, that is not a confession. Therefore, it must be reported to the law. Yet, this problem is not just the Catholic Church. It's been found in all denominations, in sports, in scouts, in schools. Schools should be a safe place for each and every child. Are students safe at school from predators? How can we keep schools safe? Consider these real-life examples. Mrs. Shrieker, a first-grade teacher, would shriek at a child, "I just want to snatch you bald-headed." Think about what a violent statement that is. Is it abuse? Mrs. P.E. science teacher routinely used sarcasm and would roll her eyes in disgust when a student would ask a simple question. One student with a significant learning disability was a hard worker, very polite and cooperative, but he had trouble with reading, organization, and all written work. One day he walked into science with his resource teacher. As they entered the room, he pleasantly asked, "Are we going to do that rock stuff today?" Mrs. Science teacher rolled her eyes and said, "Of course, David. What did you think we were going to do?" At the end of the period, as we left the room, David commented to his resource teacher, "I wish she'd stop rolling her eyes at me. I'm not stupid." Is this abuse or just terrible teaching? Mr. Middle School art teacher liked to cop a feel as he helped the girls put on their aprons for working with messy clay or paint. To keep schools safe, we must be professional enough and brave enough to report any questionable events or behaviors of other teachers or staff to the principal for investigation. This is extremely difficult, but critically important. Consider this true story. Lupe, an 8th grader, was kicked out of Mr. Social Studies class, so he went to the resource room. When I asked why he was kicked out, Lupe shrugged. "I was just joking around." He had a mild learning disability, very high IQ, quick sense of humor, didn't like men in authority, and enjoyed pushing the buttons of adults to get a reaction. In fact, he was accomplished at that. I liked Lupe, although few of his other teachers did. He was somewhat hyper, but didn't have ADHD. It just took a lot of creative teaching to reach him, and never let him push your buttons. So we went back to settle the problem. As we entered the room, Mr. Social Studies yelled, "Lupe, I could rip your effing lips off!" Yes, he actually shouted the F word. In shock, I turned to Lupe and said, "Lupe, obviously Mr. Social Studies can't talk to us now. Go straight back to my room and stay there. Wait for me there. Do you understand?" With a subdued nod, Lupe left. I turned to Mr. Social Studies, prepared for another tirade of obscenities. That did not happen. When I asked him what the student did, he evaded the question and demanded that the student be removed from his class immediately. What would you do if you were the resource teacher? Here's a happier story. One teacher made a difference. Mrs. Jane Opliger taught children in what was termed an educable, mentally retarded classroom in St. Louis, Missouri for 20 years. The children called her Ms. Opp, and she taught them many important lessons. A lifelong learner herself, Miss Opp, at the age of 87, was enrolled in a reading, writing, and reciting class at the Senior Center in Austin, Texas. Here is her memorable story. You want your child to be a Gerby baby? Picture sky blue sparkling eyes, curly, soft, light blonde hair, a happy, ever-ready, sweet smile. That was Tommy Thompson, a 5-year-old treasure who came to me with his adoring foster parent, who was a treasure herself, round and soft. Tommy trusted her so completely that she could leave him there with me on the first day without a tear or a worry. I don't think he would ever know how lucky he was to have been placed in her care. What a pleasure he was to mingle and fit right into our schedule. His abilities were limited, and he learned slowly, but as usual he learned to return little fights over toys or words in the schoolyard. We would have peaceful talks about what happened and who hit first and who started and who didn't do anything. Tried to find that talking about anger or fighting could solve a problem without a fight, without hurting his friend or being hurt or facing the principal. Tommy, after about 3 years, went on to the next older group and then to high school. One day, as I parked behind the Five and Dime, I hear, Hi, Miss Opp. It's me over here. I got a job. I take out the trash and I bring in the new stuff. I'm the back door man." He said he was married and had a baby, and he said, "My wife gives me trouble and doesn't do what I say, so I beat her up till she does." I reminded him of our talks about peace and talking about problems, and that it didn't do any good to hurt others. He looked so remorseful. The next visit to the Five and Dime, Tommy called out to me. He was so happy, saying, "It works, Miss Opp, it works. I talked to my wife and I don't hit her anymore, and I remember what you said, and it works." Tommy was in his loving foster home from the age of about 2 until he was 18. His birth mother was a successful lawyer and his father a prominent physician. They were not able to face the life of raising a retarded child. I often think of what they missed in their life. Children with disabilities. They are more vulnerable to predators, less likely to be able to report abuse. Children experiencing abuse may demonstrate behaviors similar to ADD, ADHD, and therefore be misdiagnosed. Most importantly, abuse can result in disabilities. Currently, we have significant research that demonstrates the terrible impact of abuse and neglect upon the brain. Read the article, "Abuse of Children with Disabilities" by Cosmos. It describes the impact of abuse and neglect on a child's brain. This is required reading for our class and should be read by every teacher and every parent. There are 2 ultimate questions. How will you make a difference? How will you make education special? Thanks for listening.